Hello, this is a case study on key components of quality assessment, and it's to be shared with new instructors of the respiratory therapy program at the New Brunswick Community College. All references to a textbook are to Davies, Herbst, and Reynolds, 2012, Leading the Way to Assessment for Learning, a Practical Guide, 2nd edition from Solution Tree Press. Teresa has started a new job as a respiratory therapy instructor at the New Brunswick Community College in St. John. She is very excited to get started as this is her alma mater and she's always wanted to return as an instructor. Teresa has been a practicing therapist for 15 years, working in home care, in clinics, the emergency room, operating room, and in intensive care units. Respiratory therapists are integral members of the healthcare team, providing healthcare to people of all stages of life, including newborns having difficulty breathing, people of all ages who need respiratory support because they are critically ill or severely injured, and people in chronic settings who have heart and lung disease. Respiratory therapists are trained in college programs that can be 3 to 5 years in length, learning in the classroom, the lab, and then in clinical or the healthcare setting, all to bring them to entry to practice. She was excited to begin working in post-secondary education and to take on one course to begin her teaching career. She discovered that she would have 18 students, and they were all adults. During her onboarding process, Teresa received all the curriculum, textbooks, and PowerPoints for delivery, as well as assessments and evaluations that her predecessor had used. She valued this. However, she really wanted to be sure she was using best practice in teaching and assessment so she could give her students the best chance at success. After the onboarding process, Teresa sat down with her new chair of allied health as she began building an assessment plan for her course, which would be a lab course in mechanical ventilation. Before meeting, Teresa read Leading the Way to Assessment for Learning, a Practical Guide, 2nd edition. Teresa sat down with the chair to discuss her timeline, learn the technical system for developing a course outline as a teaching and learning contract to her learners, and discover who her mentor would be to discuss and build the lab course assessments. She and her chair discussed formative assessment that supports student learning. Teresa's chair explained that formative assessment was done during the learning to support the learning and should be done often and with great purpose. Teresa went into her book and found on page 12 where it said that formative classroom assessment establishes a positive classroom culture for assessment and establishes the use of assessment tools. It also establishes learning goals and tracks individual student progress toward those goals. It uses varied instruction and assessment methods, descriptive feedback to students, and adaptation of instruction as learning needs are identified. And students are involved in the learning and assessment. Teresa really wanted to focus on formative assessment that supports student learning. Teresa also wanted to be sure her summative evaluations toward the end of the lab course were appropriate, and she planned to work with an experienced teacher to be sure her final evaluations were appropriate. The chair set a meeting with Teresa and one of the experienced clinical setting instructors, Jack. Teresa came to understand that she was teaching one of 3 different courses on mechanical ventilation, otherwise known as life support. The first course, taught by her colleague Michelle, was classroom-based, teaching all of the didactic knowledge necessary to give the students a base knowledge in mechanical ventilation. The second course would be Teresa's course, a 15-week laboratory course where students could now practice and master the skills learned in the classroom. The third course, facilitated by Jack, would be where students take their laboratory practice and apply it on actual patients in a clinical setting, such as an intensive care unit. As Teresa's lab course would become a prerequisite for the clinical course in mechanical ventilation, she needed to discuss her learning outcomes, her methods of assessment to make sure her mentor thought they were fair, and the best ways for students to demonstrate their learning outcomes and show they were indeed ready for clinical. Teresa had read on page 29 of her text that teachers should work together to build confidence in the description of what is to be learned. Her mentor, Jack, told her that with each lab she schedules, she should choose just one subject area and try to summarize the goal of the day based on how the learning must be demonstrated. He recommended that she print off the curriculum documents for this course so she could make sure nothing gets missed over the 15-week course. He showed her where to find this in the document management system and also where they originated nationally. He also explained that each skill or competency is really a learning outcome. For this course, she would really give the students an excellent chance for success if she used the exact same assessment tools on the high fidelity mannequins in lab that would be used later in clinical on real patients. If she could use these documents, called competency-based objectives, there would be no guessing how the student would be assessed in their final course. He also had a number of excellent videos she could use as exemplars, videos that many intensive care unit respiratory therapists had made over time to demonstrate key competencies. Teresa and Jack reviewed one competency-based objective together, noting that the steps to the skill, initiate invasive ventilation, were on the left side of the form. An explanation of the benchmark students had to achieve by the end of the course was on the right. Recently added was an assessment of attitude, which can be measured over time for themes. This form could really help as a starting point for clarity around learning targets and overarching goals. It was an excellent breakdown of what the students must do and their criteria for success. However, Teresa began to think of how she could involve her students in co-creating additional learning outcomes in the lab course. She set to work posting materials on the Students' Learning Management System, or LMS, and collecting the equipment she would require in lab for the very first day. Teresa knew the quote from page 75. Assessment that works in the interests of children will enhance their ability to see and understand their learning for themselves, to judge it for themselves, and to act on judgments. She wanted to get the assessments just right. She knew she wanted her adult students to critically think about the information they learned in the classroom and apply it in the lab in a safe atmosphere before going to the intensive care unit where real, critically ill people would be. She wanted the assessments in this lab to be for learning. Teresa decided she would begin talking about the learning early. She recorded a 3-minute video of herself to introduce herself, the lab, and the purpose for the mechanical ventilation lab course. In the video, she encouraged students to print off all week 1 materials and bring them to the lab during their scheduled lab time. She also encouraged textbooks and binders from their previous classroom course on mechanical ventilation to be used as resources during their practice and application of concepts in lab. She posted this short video on the LMS for her students. When students entered her lab for the first time, she introduced the same information. However, she expanded on it. She wanted to engage her learners in conversation about their learning. She said, "We're going to be working with mechanical ventilation in simulation for the next 15 weeks. It will be important that you review your information that you have already learned in your classroom mechanical ventilation course and bring those binders and textbooks to lab for your reference. There will always be enough desks and chairs for you at the center of the 10-bed lab. Feel free to place your materials out on the desks." Teresa continued by saying, "It is important that you learn how to gather the information you need and make sense of it, as you will be the bedside specialist with respect to mechanical ventilation in the intensive care unit wherever you work. I will have textbooks and online resources you can use in the lab, and we'll have tablet-based mechanical ventilation simulators and real mechanical ventilators, both systems to simulate you ventilating a real patient. You have to decide the elements that you need to know, or the ones you found difficult while learning in the classroom, and you must make choices about what is important and what may be a distraction to you. I can help you. Toward the second half of the lab course, you will begin to put it all together. You must take all of the information you have from the classroom course and make sense of it here, thoughtfully using the information to safely apply mechanical ventilation techniques. Even if you end up having a 30-year career, you will use these techniques every single day." Teresa followed this by having students vote on their preferred lab times, and she then passed out the course outline, which clarified her contact information, content to be covered, competencies, essential skills to be practiced, a bibliography, and various learning activities, formative assessments for learning, and their final summative evaluations. Students began to realize they would have some choice in how they were to be assessed. They were nervously chatting about the options. One young lady was excited to know this was such an important lab for their future career, and another student was thankful for this preparation going into lab. Teresa was encouraged by the buzz in the lab. She knew that when students are involved from the beginning, they are more ready to learn. She also knew that when students are involved in their learning from the beginning and throughout the learning process, they are more likely to understand what is expected of them, access prior knowledge, have ownership over their learning, be able to give themselves descriptive feedback as a form of formative assessment, and give information to their teachers that they will need to adjust their teaching. She got ready to talk to them about how this involvement would work. Next, on the desks in the middle of the lab, Teresa laid out all of the CBOs that the students would be expected to know and do by the time the course was finished. These lab CBOs were the same as the CBO evaluations for clinical. Each CBO had a rubric, like the one Teresa and Jack had reviewed, explaining all of the steps students were expected to do, the benchmark for the level of their independence and skill, and a spot to evaluate the benchmark they achieved and their attitude. Teresa gave each paper-based CBO, they were numbered 1 to 10, to each student. Students were told that they held in their hands drafts of all of their final summative evaluations for the practical components of both their lab and clinical courses. Teresa described these as their final targets. She explained that each time a new one of these competencies was demonstrated by her, students would follow the exact same learning and assessment process, and today was the day to learn that process for their first competency. She then walked to a bedside in the lab and turned on the mechanical ventilator, following the steps outlined on their very first competency-based objective. Students were encouraged to take notes on their paper copies of this CBO as they watched Teresa. It was then that she said, "By the end of the course, each of you will be expected to do what I just did without prompting from me and without a lab partner. I will repeat the exact same process now, and I would like you to follow along on the CBO rubric, stopping me to ask any questions about the steps, as these are steps you will practice and be assessed on multiple times during the course. Before your final lab exam, a summative evaluation on December 7th. Your many assessments of one skill over time are what we call formative assessments, and they will all involve my demonstration, your input into the steps to be successful, and then small group formation, a self-assessment, and a peer assessment, and then some final descriptive feedback from me before a large group debriefing session. As promised, Teresa repeated the skill steps again and then asked for everyone's input into the steps so that the final criteria, now co-created, was complete. She took 15 minutes to update her CBO document, adding student suggestions in blue, printed them, and handed CBO number 1 back out to the students with its new student-created criteria added. She said this CBO number 1 was no longer in draft. It was now complete because of their input. Teresa then encouraged the students to gather around the 3 mechanical ventilators in groups of 6 and think about the steps to this CBO. She said, "I want one person to navigate the controls of the ventilator, one to watch the user interface, and one to read out the steps. I also want one to be the scribe for any observations or questions. The final 2 people will present together your group's practice findings once you're done. What did you see, hear, and feel?" The person navigating the controls will be the one following the steps and performing the actions, and so they will be the one you assess, and they will self-assess. When they are done the steps, switch roles so someone else can be assessed while at the controls. Give good descriptive feedback where possible, and please relate what you are doing to the previous classroom knowledge in mechanical ventilation. Once all people have had a turn at the controls and at feedback, we will come back as a class to talk about important terms and identify if there are any criteria you and your small group have discovered are missing. Teresa explained to her students that once the lab process for formative assessment is done, she would again update the CBO rubric, if necessary, and the updated document would become the student guide to self and peer assessment over the next 15 weeks. In this way, you have had input into your learning and how you will be assessed, she said. And there is also a full explanation of the relative order of skills and context for this learning in your textbook for this lab course. Each week, you will see a text reading posted on your LMS as an important resource to help you prepare and then review the weekly CBO. I'm also posting on your LMS a video of this competency-based objective while it is being performed by me in Simulation Lab. I'll also post a second video so you can see it performed in the intensive care unit on a real patient. These videos will help you with context and help you form mental images of what success looks like. Teresa knew that when teachers give samples to review and talk with students about what is important in their learning, they help them build mental models of what success looks like. and this is particularly important for the students who struggle the most. Teresa also explained her question and answer corner on the LMS. This is an area for you to discuss questions, and each student will be responsible to post at least one question per week to the class that ties classroom learning with what you've learned in the lab. Students are encouraged to try to answer those questions, and I will weigh in as well. Teresa continued, "Before you leave today, I will have each student sign this safe space agreement. In other words, what happens in simulation lab stays in simulation lab, and we always help each other when learning and practicing in groups. It must be a safe space for you to practice and become competent in each competency every week. Do not forget that after 15 weeks, you will be in clinical and performing skills on real patients who are attached to real mechanical ventilators. Here in the lab, mistakes are valued in that we all get to learn from them before going to clinical. I will be mixing the groups each time you learn a brand new CBO in order to give you an opportunity to learn from and with each other. Remember, your previous material and textbooks from the Classroom Mechanical Ventilation course are very important resources for you. Also, very important is learning from each other. So bring your CBO rubrics and discuss each other's successes and challenges with the steps, both respectfully and professionally. We will only practice one new CBO every week. A week from today, so Monday of next week, you will each present your CBO in the morning before we move on to a new competency-based objective. If you would like it recorded for future study for your lab exam, just let me know and I will record your presentation. We will do these presentations of the previous week's CBO every Monday morning. Please remember why we will do these presentations each Monday before learning a new skill. This will be a chance for you to find out what you already know about last week and learn from your group members. Teresa knew this time for learning with peers would be important in her students' preparation for the intensive care unit only a few short months away. Here, they could take safe risks necessary for learning. Teresa knew that some students would fly through these practice sessions and others would struggle. She knew it was a very good step to make the criteria of the first CBO well known and to co-construct the criteria for the assessment rubric. She also felt that giving descriptive feedback based on criteria the whole class developed would only build trust and would begin to make more of the implicit expectations explicit. Teresa then explained take-home self-assessments and goal setting. Another way that I will check in with your level of learning is through take-home self-assessments. Before you leave today, pull out your digital tracker app on your phone and start a plus-minus activity. Write a very short narrative, a couple of sentences, in the comment box about what you feel you were able to do well with this new CBO number 1. Be specific and descriptive. Next, write a couple of sentences to describe what you would like to improve next time you perform this skill. Please email me your narratives so I can assist you to set a plan for the next lab. Next, set 1 or 2 goals in your tracker using both your self-assessment and CBO rubric to help you set them. Write down the goals, how you will start, and who you wish to partner with to achieve these goals. We will track the achievement of these goals weekly, but you must send them in Monday after your lab class. This will give you practice and refinement, helping you retain this skill and improve as we move on to the next one next week. Teresa knew that student self-assessment would be important in this class to help guide each student's focus and their needs on Wednesdays and Fridays of each week. She also knew from reading the research that when students make choice about their learning, achievement increases. When choice is absent, learning decreases. It wasn't only the students learning. Every time Teresa had an opportunity to assess, it informed her professional judgment, helping her to become more descriptive and specific in her feedback. Teresa planned to revisit the CBOs after the first week. She explained, each Monday, after all the student presentations on the CBO from the week before, I will revisit one more time to check the level of learning. I will ask all students to write out 2 things they learned from the presentations and ask one remaining question. She remembered a quote from Michael Fullan that read, "An event is not an experience until you reflect on it." I will compile the questions and answer each one in the question and answer section on your LMS. While every week would include learning and mastering of a new CBO, she would still do little pop-up skill demonstrations where groups would have to perform a skill they had learned a previous week. She encouraged groups to bring every CBO they had learned to lab in case they needed a resource to help them remember. Each Monday after presentations, Teresa presented a new CBO with rubric and had students co-create criteria. She noticed that inputs became more in-depth as the weeks went on, and application happened faster while students worked together to create high-quality work. She did not allow the students to forget the skills they had learned, and Teresa developed many ways to continue to collect evidence of their learning. Teresa assigned a midterm and end-of-term group video project where groups could perform every CBO learned to date and revisit the criteria to provide evidence that there was improvement at midterm and mastery at the end of term. Groups also had to indicate the future setting or situation that they would be using these skills in their videos. Teresa planned an open house for midterm where students could show off the skills they learned to other healthcare program students such as nursing and could invite friends or family members to come see what they know and get a sense of what they need to learn to prepare for the clinical setting. Each student would have an end-of-term professional conversation with her where they could discuss with Teresa the CBOs, the skills and techniques they had learned, and how they related to previous coursework. She provided rubrics for each of these assignments and would video any summative evaluation if students wanted, so they could add this to their digital portfolio of their learning or share with family and friends. Teresa enjoyed her new lab course, where the culture supported specific feedback based on defined criteria. With the many observations of her students' learning, the products her students created, such as self-assessments, Monday morning presentations, and videos, and their professional conversations, Teresa and her students were able to see and experience the process of triangulation. From these sources, Teresa knew her final summative evaluations were well-informed, reliable, and valid, and her final report to each student would be extensive and professional. In this way, Teresa applied her professional judgment at the end of the course to determine if each student was successful. All of her students were successful. However, this was not a surprise to Teresa, given the multiple opportunities for formative assessment during the lab course. Teresa enjoyed sharing assessment with the students, and her confidential student course evaluations at midterm and at end of term confirmed that the students were enjoying her lab course. The general feedback said students enjoyed the hands-on experience, and the students also appreciated being treated with respect as they gained expertise. One student said, "I had so much feedback. Learning from my many peers, my own reflections, and my teacher, I gained the confidence to speak up more often, and I learned more in this class than I have in any other lab.